I'm not certain about that, Chanel. What I'd say is this: there are some people who, put it to you this way, there are some people who are threatening me, they're threatening my family. They are essentially attacking the safety of my family. Be really clear and hear this message. I will not be deterred from the work I'm doing to keep every family safe. That's the work that I've been given to do. That's the job that we have to do. So there are some out there who are making threats against me and Kath and the kids. That's not my focus. The focus is keeping every single Victorian family safe. And I wouldn't want the appalling, the disgusting and the potentially criminal behaviour of a small number of people to detract away from the amazing job that so many Victorians have done. It is so unfair for a small, ugly mob to be taking attention away from the more than 90% of Victorians who have had a first dose and will soon have had a second dose. That's where our focus should be. I'm proud of those Victorians and I am deeply grateful to those Victorians. Debate is fine. Disagreement is fine. That is a part of our system. What we have seen in recent days and weeks is not fine. It is awful. But it does not speak to the values, the views and the conduct of the vast, vast majority of Victorians. And I, on their behalf, I am offended, not at the threats, but at the fact that this ugly behaviour might be taking the focus away from what we should be focused on, how much we've achieved by sticking together, not by being divided, not by this ugliness. I'll make one final point on this issue, and I'm not here to talk about our political opponents, but politics is often about what you stand for, and it's always about who you stand with. And there have been some podium shared, some comfort given. This is a preference hunt for some, and I don't think that ordinary, hard-working, mainstream Victorians, those who are not ugly extremists, will easily or readily forget who's been out on the front steps currying favour with extremists. Imagine if the Premier of this state had to manage a pandemic like we've had to manage these last 2 years, if you were beholden to extremists, if you somehow owed extremists a debt of gratitude. That is ugly, that is scary, but it's not reflective of what the vast, more than 9 in 10 Victorians have done an amazing thing. And what saddens me is not these threats. What saddens me is that the focus might, even for one moment, be taken away from them. They've earned our gratitude. They've certainly got mine.
Speaking of mainstream Victorians who aren't extremists, we've had the Ombudsman and the Law Institute of Victorian Bar, among others, come out in the last 24 hours and state that they still have concerns about this legislation. One of their primary concerns is that it allows the indefinite detention without charge of people. Are you comfortable with allowing that?
Yeah, look, I wouldn't want any of us to conflate legitimate concerns or criticisms or views. That's a perfectly natural and important part of our parliamentary process. I also, just as I've made that acknowledgement, I'd also ask people to acknowledge that some of the nonsense that's being peddled about no consultation is simply wrong. That is simply wrong. Now, we don't have the luxury, frankly, in a dynamic environment, in an environment where this pandemic is not over, none of us have the luxury to consult and consult and consult in order to achieve universal support. If you did that, well, we'd be here for a very long time. And the current arrangements, through no one's fault, it's just the nature of the challenge we face, the current arrangements need to be refreshed and renewed quite soon. So at some point you have to say, right, we've listened to a broad range of views. We have a set of arrangements that are a definite. Even the greatest critic of this bill, I think, would accept that it's a better set of arrangements than the current Public Health and Wellbeing Act. Does every single stakeholder and group support every single word in the bill? Well, no, and that's never the case. There's always a disagreement or different views. That's perfectly fine. That's what the Parliament's there for. That's why we have elections every 4 years, and that's why people are elected to make these very difficult decisions. And the upper house is doing that important work. And no doubt they're in for some long hours this week, and I'm grateful to them.
To the substance of my question, though, are you comfortable with a law that allows you to detain people without charge indefinitely without them having the right of appeal to it?
Well, yeah, and that's not something that... The thing is this, though. Let's be very clear. There's a context. There's an absolute context in relation to these matters. And I think that there are safeguards, there are checks and balances that are far in excess of what exists at the moment. And I would again just point and reflect on the fact that some of the very safeguards that people are very concerned about, they don't exist in the current bill. They don't, in the current Act rather, they don't exist. And yet, have those powers been used? Have those powers been used in an arbitrary way? Like, in order for a criticism to have some greater strength, I think you'd need to point to some examples where people had abused such a power, where something had moved from being conceptual or a potential, a possibility, however faint, into actual practice. And I'm pleased to say that people cannot point to that kind of arbitrary conduct. This is a public health and wellbeing amendment. It's about pandemic management. It's about safety. It's about saving lives. And everything in the bill should be read down in that context. That's exactly the way these things work. As yesterday, the 20th report to the Parliament was tabled, and you know, if you stack them all up, they're probably as tall as I am. This is a framework that is absolutely about scrutiny and oversight. But at the same time, a pandemic means that you don't necessarily have the luxury of waiting a week or a month or 6 months to get everybody's agreement on every single issue. That's why I've said to you, with the greatest of respect, I'm sure you would acknowledge that I've said to you on more than one occasion, and I've meant it every time, that this is not about popularity. It's a pandemic, and it has to be managed. And that means making some very difficult and sometimes unpopular choices. The good news, though, well, it's more than good news. It's absolutely fantastic news, is that we're going to pass through the 90% double dose number very, very soon. There'll be very few rules, if any, compared to where we were, and that's all down to the amazing job that Victorians have done. Let's focus on that. That's what's most important.